Hello, and welcome to my virtual classroom. I am Professor D.Bيكman. I am a professor at Brigham Young University in the US, and of course, I am a scientific advisor for Unicity. I am very happy to be able to spend a few minutes with you right now. I am your professor, and you are going to be my students as I teach you some principles about how you can feel great by really improving your metabolic health in particular. Metabolic health is my expertise as a scientist, and now I'm happy to be your professor to teach some of these ideas. Now remember, as I teach this, I want you to be thinking of the material that you are learning. How can you take these ideas and turn them into your own ideas? How can you listen and learn from what I'm teaching you and find ways to teach other people? I want you to become teachers. Your students right now, I want you to become teachers to other people. Okay, first of all, I'm talking about metabolic health, and you may be wondering, what is metabolic health? Well, there are many ways we could define metabolic health. One way would be looking at it through the metabolic syndrome. You've probably heard of the term metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome are these several little problems that tend to clump together, that they tend to go together, where waist circumference is too high, so you have too much fat in the middle of your body, or your blood glucose levels, your blood sugar is too high, or your blood pressure is too high, or your blood lipids are wrong with high triglycerides and low HDL cholesterol. Any of these principles together starts to turn into the metabolic syndrome. And it is estimated worldwide that about half of all adults have metabolic syndrome. Not to say that they even have one of these, but half of worldwide adults have several of these features. Interestingly, what we call the metabolic syndrome used to be called the insulin resistance syndrome, because all of these things are a consequence of insulin resistance and or directly contribute to insulin resistance. I actually like this term better, insulin resistance syndrome, because it's a little more accurate. We know what's ultimately wrong when we call it the insulin resistance syndrome. Now, what's very important is that the consequences of insulin resistance are far more relevant than just these metabolic syndrome problems. Insulin resistance is the main contributing factor to many chronic diseases, including the most deadly, like heart disease and diabetes and fatty liver disease. Certain forms of cancer are affected by insulin resistance, and so too is just body fat. Obesity contributes and is driven by insulin resistance. Also, insulin resistance causes infertility disorders, like polycystic ovary syndrome in women or erectile dysfunction in men. But insulin resistance also highly affects the brain, contributing to migraines and contributing to depression and dementia. So lots of brain problems are also a result of insulin resistance. Now, given how prevalent insulin resistance is, considering how many diseases are affected by insulin resistance, let's now move on to the next point. After you've taught your friend about the problems that come from insulin resistance, they may want to know what causes insulin resistance. The most common and important cause of insulin resistance is chronically elevated insulin levels. When insulin is up too much for too long, it drives insulin resistance. It's almost like you were standing by a loud sound. There's so much sound that eventually you start to go deaf. You can't hear that sound as well as you used to. That's exactly what happens in the cells of the body. When there's so much insulin coming at the cell, it starts to not sense the insulin as well as it used to. Now, you may then say, or your friend may ask you, but is it even that common for high insulin levels? Let me just show you how it is so common. Let's take an individual who eats 3 meals a day. When they eat their breakfast and their lunch and their supper, insulin levels go up a lot. But this is if a person is only eating 3 times a day. These moments during the day, and certainly at night, when insulin levels can come down. which can recalibrate the body to allow it to become more insulin sensitive. However, most people don't eat just 3 times a day. Most people fill in any of these big meal gaps by snacking. And so when we look at the insulin levels when a person is snacking all the time, you can see that insulin stays elevated virtually every moment of the day. But this, maybe you would say, well, there's still some little moments when insulin kind of comes down, even though it's not coming down to where it was at fasted levels. It still comes down a little, but this is what happens in an insulin-sensitive person. But more than half of all adults worldwide are insulin-resistant. And if we look at the same pattern of eating in an insulin-resistant person, then you'll see that insulin levels are up all the time and never have any time to come back down. So if high insulin is the most common and important cause of insulin resistance, it's no surprise to you then that the best way to reduce insulin resistance is to reduce insulin levels. That's how we fix the problem. So the best way to correct insulin resistance is to lower insulin. A friend says, well, how can I lower my insulin? You say there are 2 really good ways to do it. And then you can tell them, and I have some tools to help you do it. The first rule is control carbohydrates in the diet. The second rule is to fast frequently. Now, why would I focus on carbohydrates? And why do I think you should focus on carbohydrates? These are the 3 main parts of the human diet: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And unfortunately, globally, across the whole world, people get about 71% of all of their calories comes from carbohydrates. So we eat a diet that is almost entirely carbohydrate, with a little bit of protein and a little more fat. So we eat a lot of carbohydrates. Now, why is that a problem? Because when we actually look at what happens to insulin levels, when we eat the 3 macronutrients, you begin to see why it's an issue. Because when a person eats protein and fat, there is little or no insulin effect. However, when a person eats pure carbohydrate, insulin can go up by well over 10 or 20 times, and it will stay elevated for up to about 3 hours. But even then, again, this is what happens to insulin levels in an insulin-sensitive person. If we look at what happens to insulin levels in an insulin-resistant person who eats carbohydrates, pure carbohydrates, then it goes up even higher, and insulin can stay elevated for up to 5 or more hours. So insulin will go up a lot and stay high for a very long time. This is why I believe the first and most important rule for improving insulin sensitivity or reducing insulin resistance is to control carbohydrates. Now, let's talk about control carbs a little more. One helpful idea for you as you talk to your friend is to tell them to focus on fiber. When we focus on fiber, then whenever we eat a carbohydrate, it brings the insulin effect down. So let's look at what happens when someone eats a good fiber like balance. And your friend may say, well, how can I focus on fiber? And you will say, I have something that can help you. And then you can hand them a balance. So with balance, you can see that the insulin effect of a carbohydrate can go down by about 20 or so percent, a very meaningful drop. And in fact, in the past, you have maybe said that you should take balance 15 minutes before a meal, but we now know that if you take balance with a meal, it results in a significant improvement in blood glucose levels rather than even taking it before. As helpful as it is to take balance before, it's better to take it with the meal. Now, not only does balance help, you also have another tool that you can help your friend to feel great. There is a molecule that you can consume, that you can eat or drink, called chlorogenic acids. This human study, which is what I'm quoting here, found that chlorogenic acids, when someone eats glucose or drinks glucose, it can immediately bring down the glucose in the blood and the insulin levels. And they also noted in this paper that was published, here is the reference right here in the corner, that chlorogenic acids were able to strongly bring down the glucose impact and lower fasting blood glucose levels all the time. Now, your friend may ask you then and say, well, how can I get chlorogenic acids? And you say, I have something that can help you. And you can give them a pack of Unimate, which is enriched with chlorogenic acids. Okay, so you have some tools to help your friend to control carbohydrates. Now, what about fasting? Fasting can be difficult because when we don't eat a meal, we can start to get very hungry. But fasting is a very fast way to lower insulin and improve insulin sensitivity. But again, it can be difficult. So your friend may say, well, I get very hungry when I fast. How can I fast more easily? Then you say, I have something that might be able to help you. And then you give them the Unimate again, and you teach them about the theobromine that is high enriched in the Unimate. And you say this has something called theobromine. And theobromine is what makes the Unimate taste a little bitter. Unimate has a unique flavor, a unique taste. And you can say that unique taste is because of theobromine. And when the body tastes something that is bitter, it actually affects the gut, your intestines, and even your fat cells. And it sends a signal to the brain, telling the brain to have a less appetite, a lower appetite. So the brain will say, I don't need to eat as much. We are not as hungry, and fasting becomes easier. Also, you can tell them that balance even helps. It will affect the bacteria in your intestines, what we call the microbiome. And your intestinal bacteria will eat the fibers in the balance, and it will turn those fibers into things called short-chain fatty acids. And even here, short-chain fatty acids have a very beneficial role on controlling appetite. So it will once again, send a signal to the brain to say, we don't need to eat, we are okay. Now, there's one more point that I want to teach you with regards to hunger. Because if a person can learn to control hunger, they can really learn to take control of their metabolic health. And so I want to teach you a little bit about gut hormones. Our intestines, from our stomach all the way down, produces many, many hormones. The most famous hormone now that is produced is a hormone called GLP-1. GLP-1 has many effects throughout the body. Its most famous effect of this most famous hormone is that it slows the stomach down. So when you eat food, the food will stay in your stomach a little longer. And if food stays in your stomach a little longer, it can reduce your hunger a little. So it helps you control your appetite. Also, GLP-1 will increase fat burning, and it will increase the metabolic rate of your fat tissue. And it will also flow in your blood to your brain and directly tell your brain that we don't need to eat as much. So this side particularly helps control hunger at the level of your stomach and intestines and your brain. And over here, we see that GLP-1 helps with fat burning. GLP-1 is so good at controlling hunger and stimulating fat burning that it has been taken advantage of to turn into drugs. Some very famous weight loss drugs, Ozempic and Wegovy, are based on GLP-1. These are drugs that turn on the GLP-1 process within the cells of the body. And the main way it works for weight loss is to slow the stomach down, but it slows the stomach down a lot. In fact, sometimes it slows the stomach down too much, but it does reduce hunger. So the person just does not want to eat at all because food is staying in the stomach for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, one of the problems with these GLP-1 drugs is that it can slow the stomach down too much. This study that was published found that there are some people who experience a paralysis of their stomach. And so the food stops moving through the stomach, and that can become very lethal. It can be life-threatening. Also, another study found that with these drugs and this extreme unhealthy weight loss, up to 40% of the weight that people lose can come from lean mass. And so if a person loses 10 kilograms, 4 of those kilograms can be coming from their muscle and their bone mass. That's very, very bad. because especially when we look at what happens when a person stops taking the drugs, look what happens. The person's losing weight, losing weight, losing weight. They stop taking the drug and the weight immediately comes back. Now there is a little bit of a difference still, maybe 5 kilograms, but what is that weight? A person, when we lose a lot of weight, but 40% of it is lean mass, and then we start to gain weight back, what do you think comes back? The lean mass or the fat mass? The fat mass comes back very easily. The lean mass does not. And in fact, depending on the age and the sex of the individual, if this is an older woman, she will never gain that lean mass back. And so she just gets all of her fat back without getting her muscle and bone back. So she actually could, even here, even though she weighs less, her percent body fat may actually be higher. She weighs less, but she may be fatter than she was before. So at this point, I want you to appreciate that GLP-1 is a beneficial molecule. It is good, but there are consequences if we turn it on too high, like we do with some of these drugs. So how can you help your friend take advantage to get the benefits of GLP-1 without all of the negatives that come with these extreme drugs? Well, you have some tools to help them feel great, even with GLP-1. It is very well known that some of the most abundant molecules in unimate, like chlorogenic acids, or EGCG, or ferulic acid, when they come into the intestines, they will stimulate the production of GLP-1. And in fact, we have data from my own lab, in the group that takes the yerba mate, the unimate, then the GLP-1 production went up about 60–70%, a significant increase in GLP-1 levels. Also, you tell your friend that not only can unimate help with GLP-1, but even balance, because these fibers, the healthy fibers in balance, actually can activate the L cells. And the L cells are the cell within the intestines that make GLP-1. So you control carbs, you focus on fiber, and both balance and unimate can help with blood glucose levels. Theobromine in unimate, and then the chlorogenic acids, the EGCG and the ferulic acid can help control hunger with GLP-1, and so too can balance with the short-chain fatty acids, and even again, more GLP-1. So you have both now the knowledge to teach your friend about metabolic health and insulin resistance, and you have the tools to help them feel great and to improve their metabolic health. Thank you for being my students. And if you have questions, please get them up to Majdi, and I can help you and teach you, especially when I can come and visit you in person, and I wish I could be with you.